Hello and welcome to Unwatchables, where the movies use their power sometimes for good, but usually for evil. I am Marc, Dottavio.
And I'm Seth Troyer.
And today we welcome back Paul Keelan of the Cinematic Underdogs podcast to discuss the abrasive, deliberately alienating character studies of Rick Alverson. Alverson often works with alt-comedy figures like Tim Heidecker and Gregg Turkington, where his films are anything but normal comedies or dramas. Whatever you want to call them, they're dark, uncomfortable provocations about people you probably don't want to spend too much time with. We're discussing two of his best-known films, though don't let the titles fool you. They are 2012's Tim Heidecker-starring The Comedy and 2015's Neil Hamburger vehicle, Entertainment. Are you not entertained, Seth?
Alverson! You know, like Alvin? Alvin and the Chipmunk?
Yeah.
That's but his mom says that.
That's good.
But I guess
that was
really wouldn't pertain to him because they would all look up. I don't know if she yelled that.
Well, I know you spent a lot of time working on that joke, so we'll keep it in.
I don't write these.
Thank you.
My cat does.
This is But Paul, thank you for your coming back on for the second time on
Round two.
Unwatchables. Paul Keelan is, of course, the host of Cinematic Underdogs, the podcast about sports films. Although, in case you're not into sports films or even sports, just the fact that I was able to be a guest on it shows that you don't need to know anything about sports to
Worry
enjoy
not.
it.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, fellas, what's up?
Hey.
It's good. It is so nice to have you back on
Paul's
again
back.
after last time we did In the Realm of the Senses and The Wayward Cloud. And we are back now with a new suggestion that, I don't know, for me might have been harder to watch than the one that ended with the cutting the guy's penis off. So this should be a good discussion.
That's wild. Yeah, I mean, full disclosure to listeners, I was the one who suggested this. So if you hate these films or if we inspire you to watch these and you do not like them, you could come after me.
Yeah.
And the podcast, you harass their podcast, not ours. Okay.
Yeah,
See, I'm drawing lines in the podcasting war that's going on, including the war against rewatchables.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, we'll see who comes out on top.
I'm happy to take more hate from you guys if you guys are getting any. We don't have enough over at Cinematic Underdogs. I think sports movies are too milquetoast of a genre. So yeah,
Okay.
Come after us, people.
Well, we'll take any of the love that we get. We'll save that because we don't get enough of that probably.
We're all about love here.
Mm-hmm.
But you guys will do stuff like computer chess or uncut gems or kind of unconventional sports type things, right? So it's not all. I think I did The Color of Money, which is a little closer, I guess, but you don't necessarily always think about pool right off the top or about chess.
Yeah, I guess my aim is to be as tangential as possible. It's more fun to talk about genre when you're outside of the genre a little bit. Like maybe Top Gun is one of my favorites. I know that's a kind of mainstream hit, but it is very interesting to talk about the two Top Gun movies and how they differ in relation to the genre, for example. But yeah, we'll do anything. Poker movies, gambling movies, California Split. That was a fun one.
Yeah.
That would have been a good one that I might have picked.
Yeah, you would have been great for that.
Yeah, see, I like your podcast for that reason, and that it is. I like podcasts that are more about, yes, there's a central thesis, but that's how you jump off into a greater, wider conversation about something maybe more important or maybe bigger, or more, at least more interesting than just like, here's this movie and sports and movies. There they are.
Absolutely, yeah. And I love genre studies, and I love having something that's a little niche. And the more we dive into it, the more you realize there is incredible range, and like they are serially like underrated. Some of these films, like Slapshot, is one of the great '70s films, like as an independent American film, not only as a hockey film. Some of the techniques were way ahead of its time and so forth. Even Rollerball, going back to like Rollerball in the '70s, right? These are pretty seminal, I think, in the canon of like American culture or like cinema culture, yet they often don't get the respect that a lot of other contemporary like 70s films might get, simply because they're sports films and or they're like coded sports films, like even more than Raging Bull, which gets the benefit of the doubt because it's Scorsese, right? So everyone's willing to
Black
give
and
that.
white.
Yeah. Yeah, that too, and De Niro, and this is not to critique Raging Bull, which is a masterpiece, but there are a lot of other ones that I think are being lost to time or still flying under the radar because they're in our genre. And so, yeah, it's quite fun to do. I mean, we got to do all the, Die Hard and a Blank ones in the 90s that were like very, very like loosely sports oriented, like Snake Eyes and Sudden Death. And
Snake Eyes is so crazy.
yeah, I just rewatched that literally like I think 3 days ago. De Palma's on one in that one. That opening, I don't know if it's quite a oneer, but
I think it's a deceptive
oneer. Yeah.
oneer.
Yeah. The Birdman
very,
style.
very well executed one.
Yeah. There is one film in the history of film, I think, that is a true oneer. Have you guys seen Victoria? It's like a film shot in Berlin. Quick shout out.
No. I know that I'm pretty sure that Russian Ark was a genuine all-in-one shot one.
Thanks for
also,
that, Rick.
which cool. I never watched, but
don't change the subject, Mark.
No. I mean, thanks for first of all correcting me for being wrong if I said that was the only one. I don't know if I did or not, but I am kind of.
Well, that's what I've heard.
Yeah,
I could be wrong about that. That's what Seth tells me all the time.
I respect people who have an allergy to oneers or like one shot films. They are incredibly gimmicky.
That's me, by the way.
Fair enough. But I have a special like place in my heart for them. I kind of like them, so I'm such a pushover for them personally. So yeah,
I say it's cool.
Yeah,
it's all right with Seth. So yeah, go check out Cinematic Underdogs wherever good, fine podcasts are listened to and shared. But I do want to dive right into why you had Rick Alverson on your mind, because he was somebody that I'd never heard of. I didn't know anything about these movies. I had no idea how they fit into our thesis, and I very much think that they do. These two movies, to me, are very much of a piece. Also, and we'll probably be using a lot of terms like anti-comedy or alt-comedy, maybe
cringe.
anti-drama. They seem to be like they have a lot of comedians or comic actors in them. There's a lot of people having horrible, awkward social interactions, lots of telling bad jokes and people just staring at them, and then sad, like ambient music coming underneath them. And it does seem like I know for sure that entertainment was mostly improvised in the dialogue, and the comedy seems like it was. But it was. Okay,
it was,
cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, why Rick Alverson? Why was he on your mind?
Well, you already answered my question a little bit too that I wanted to throw right back at you, because I didn't ask you this when I introduced it. It was whether you were familiar with him. And I want to just shoot before I say this. I know you asked me a question, but Seth, were you familiar with him either? Or
I've seen both of these because I am a big like Awesome Show and Neil Hamburger fan. So I was very excited to watch these when they came out. Yeah.
One of the funny things about, this world, the Rick Alverson, I guess, it's a very small filmography, right? He only has 4 feature films that are full length, is that I'll run into, people I like acquaintances who have watched these because they're such like Tim and Eric fans, right? And I don't come at it from that angle at all, actually. I come at my angle is that I was very much immersed in the kind of the IndieWire world of 2013 to 2016. And they had a few critics over there that were definitely advocates for Alverson. And then he also had a lot of pushback from like the New York Times, right? Like A.O. Scott really hated his films. So there was this interesting dialectic going on. And I love to read every review I can get my hands on usually. And so right away I was pretty interested. But as time went on, I feel like his films got very quickly like effaced by the culture, right? Like no one was talking about them soon thereafter. And by the like 2020s, I don't think anyone really thinks of Alverson anymore. And I was thinking lately, because I do love your thesis and I love your pod and you guys are dope. So I wanted to come on, right? I'm thinking of things to come on. And I'm like, oh, you guys have not touched Alverson. And I wrote a long, long piece for a website that was at that point called 25YL. It's now called Film Obsessive, about his fourth film, which we're not covering today. And I think it's actually fitting that we're not covering this film. We can get into that later, but it's less provocative. It's less quote unquote unwatchable, but it's called
Mountain,
The Mountain. Yes. Right. And it was like about how he's matured into The Mountain. But that also wasn't a critique of these films either. It was just like there was a definite maturation that went on from him playing with this sort of docufiction into a more fictional setting with that film that showed a big leap in, not that docufiction or fiction are better, right? I actually tend to love docufiction films almost more than anything. They always have this friction to them, right? And maybe that's why
friction, you could say.
Yes, well put, right? Like, I think, I don't know if it was Entertainment or The Comedy, but one of these films came out at the same time of The Act of Killing or The Look of Silence, right? I'm blanking on his name.
Which we've previously covered on this, but I don't remember the years they came out.
Which blew my mind, right? I was living in Korea at the time, but we had just traveled to Indonesia. So, like, I felt very, like, close to just, like, Indonesian culture, and just in a superficial way, of course. I was just there for a few weeks, but then they had this film that was one of the most it's hard to even put a descriptor on that film, but it's both abrasive and illuminating and uncomfortable, and it's playing with docufiction a lot, right? They're fictionalizing what they did during the genocide, and these were docufiction in a totally different element. And so I was very intrigued by just this world of docufiction at that time. So I wanted a platform to chat on Alverson. I'm a big fan of his, and he doesn't make a lot of films either. And so I feel like I'm always scared that he's going to just get lost or not get the funding he needs. So I do like to champion some filmmakers that kind of, especially in this space, I feel like we had a lot of great indie filmmakers in that time period, like I just said, 2013. I don't know, I'm picking that year, but the early 2010s, right? To the mid ones, right? Like Sebastian Silva, right? Even Alex Ross Perry, who's very busy in the podcast circuit and so forth, but he hasn't really made films lately. And I thought that this was a really fascinating wave of American independent cinema. It was like post mumblecore. It was like often pinned as mumblecore films, but I think they were doing something a little more interesting than the Joe Swanberg and Duplass brothers of the world.
Yeah, there's kind of a mumblecore thing going on with this guy, I think. Almost in a way that maybe you could see these movies as an act of aggression against mumblecore, using that to be as alienating as you could possibly be.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, including the inclusion of like Tim Heidecker or something, it almost feels like a trap,
right?
For like, I don't know, your average indie rock fan who laughs at Tim Heidecker and watches mumblecore or something and likes this aesthetic of like, I don't know, yeah, this general aesthetic of film that is sort of like an indie sort of, the camera's kind of free and the editing and the like narrative's kind of free and stuff in this way.
Improv.
And it's New York and this is the setting, of course, and everything like that. But yeah, it feels like a trap because once you're in, like you were kind of alluding to, is that it's not even for Tim Heidecker fans. It feels like once you start actually getting in here, in a way it is, because it still is a part of that tradition of sorts that those guys are playing in, which is this Andy Kaufman, like, isn't it wild that I'm doing a bit that is not funny? Actually, it's very uncomfortable and you don't know what to do. And that's sort of like where this, it definitely expands much further from there, but yeah.
Yeah, and these, like, just to try and give an idea, I guess, to anyone who is not familiar with these do seem like very strange, like off-putting films, but they do come down to basically being plotless, minimalist character studies. In the case of The Comedy, which came out in 2012, and I guess was his second full-length film. Sometimes I've heard it called his third, but maybe there was a short in there.
Don't use the plotless word. I hate the plotless word. That's
well,
like,
it is. That's
no,
not a
every
criticism. It's just
fucking
a
movie
descriptor.
has Stan Brakhage has plots. Like, they're plots. The
Not
thing
really.
happens, and then another thing happens, and it looks different. I don't
Well,
know.
because something happens on the screen, but I mean, this is not a narrative-driven film. That's like about a, story beats taking place. It's rambling, and in this case, it's about a guy who's played by Tim Heidecker, who I would say spends half his time hanging out with his friend group, which includes Eric Wareheim and James Murphy for some reason. I was like, what
Yeah,
the
he's just
hell
there
is he
in the
doing here,
background,
man?
kind of miming.
Yeah.
He doesn't say
And
much.
they just pretty much all they do is just do bits and riff on each other, and sometimes lapse into long, depressing silences. And then the other spent half of his time is him doing these bits and telling jokes in front of just onlookers who are unamused or even being abused by him. And
they're bits,
those are-
and they're also like, I don't know, they're real interactions. They're real like antagonistic interactions that this rich, yeah, because he's clearly, it's like dad is dying or something. He's a rich kid, Tim Heidecker, and he just has nothing to do with his fucking time. He's just like a Ray-Ban wearing short guy in New York riding his bike around, doesn't have anything to do, and just drinks all day. So, and he's just like a shitty guy. So he has
right,
like
he
these
fucks with
pent up.
people.
Yeah, he fucks with people. He's like, I don't know. Basically, he reminds me of like this, like the worst kind of Reddit, like mega bro who would never ever say mega or something, or never ever actually like waiting for you to come out and like get hashtag triggered or something almost in some of these, just for the sake of it because he's just fucking bored and kind of sociopathic at certain points.
Yeah, and I was reminded a lot, especially when they're all just sitting around giving each other shit and stuff. Like, I wonder if this was inspired by a lot of those Judd Apatow comedies that had them all just sitting around, making fun of each other. And that this is, I guess, trying to take that to the dark side of how this can be a way of communicating between soulless monsters.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you brought up Apatow. I did not have that association the first time I watched these, but with time, and also with the fact that I am currently watching a lot of Apatow films in the past few months and rewatching these for this pod, that was the first thing that came to my mind. And The Hangover too, like Alan from The Hangover, which is Zach Galifianakis, right? Who's also in the similar lane of comedy as all of these guys, right? He's someone who is. He tries to
I could see
alienate
him
you.
in one of these movies, frankly.
Absolutely. And the comedy feels like it's that character from The Hangover, but not so absurd and silly and mainstream. And I don't want to get in trouble for saying this, but kind of like quasi-autistic or on the spectrum, right? Because in that movie, they're trying to like, he's socially awkward in a way that is very beyond, right?
Sure.
Seems unavoidable. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I didn't have to diagnose it, but that aside, right? He's eccentric in a way that is frankly silly, to throw that word out again, and comes off as somewhat juvenile in the craft, but funny. Like I don't hate the Hangover movies. I had a good time when I watched this with my friends. They have their nostalgic purpose, but here it feels like a response to that. Like they took that, but they made a real character study, and that's how you opened this up, Marc. Both these films are character studies at the end of the day. What they're saying is somewhat inscrutable at times and somewhat very transparent at times. But if there's anything that, like, whether you want to fall on like the side of hating them because you hate the characters, or falling for them because you find like the nuance or the lack of judgment interesting, they simply especially the comedy, it just nails this type of hipster that exists.
Yes.
In a way that very few pieces of fiction ever have and ever will. And so to me, also with time, it has become such a capsule of time watching this 10 years later now, because all of the signifiers, I know we still drink Paps. I know we still play baseball at the park. I know we still wear the small shorts. I know that we still wear Ray-Bans at times, but all these things were very much of that time period, and so strongly coded in that time period is this lead character. And I didn't know anyone as obnoxious or abrasive or repulsive as the lead in the comedy here, right? But pretty darn close to some of the hijinks I've seen. So there's this nihilism that like definitely seeps into urban hipster culture that is so terminally bored and filled with ennui that it kind of lashes out or just seeks amusement by creating conflict. And I feel like he's constantly just trying to amuse himself by creating some form of conflict in various settings.
Definitely. And the movie itself, I think we were kind of getting close to saying this earlier, is that especially with involving people like Tim and Eric and Neil Hamburger, that this movie itself has a sense like it's trolling the audience to an extent, where it's deliberately withholding from you the laughs that you might be expecting to have because of who's in it and because it resembles other kind of shambling improvised, comedies where people are riffing on stuff. You could, to the extent that it is, plotless or without a resolution or all of those things, that this movie does want to be off-putting to the audience, which I can understand. You could talk about, I guess, what purpose that fulfills, but I think that's, at least however you feel about it, that's in play here, that the movie itself is something that does not care what you think about it or what you're getting out of it.
Yeah, these interactions that Tim Heidecker goes on, which I'll just keep on referring to him as Tim Heidecker. I don't know. He's like a mutant, evil. Like, what could have happened to Tim Heidecker if he didn't find an outlet or something, or like had a rich dad like this? But yeah, I mean, they are like almost, they border on like horror scenes. Like, I don't know. They get like the one of the biggest scenes that I always walk away with is the taxi driver scene, where he clearly has this weird thing because he's like holier than thou sort of feeling towards like the quote unquote working class, people that work, because he doesn't fucking work. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't participate in anything. So barely, like, he almost doesn't exist in the world. He's just a fucking ghost. And there's also another scene where he's like wooing a girl who's like sort of humoring him. Like, he's basically describing like borderline eugenics in a jokey sort of way, but he is speaking from this way of like, well, certain people are just like drones and they don't mean anything and they're not important. Like, and there are people that are important. They do have like important thoughts, which is just like the whole like NPC thing, which is like very kind of ahead of its time in that way. Some of the people, like the way they talk. But yeah, the taxi scene is him. He's like in the back of a taxi and he starts harassing this taxi driver and like trying to get him, like paying him to drive the taxi around. Like, he wants to drive the taxi. Like, let me drive it. I'll pay you $300, $400, $500. And the taxi driver finally lets him do it. And he just like fucks with him and speeds around and then like starts harassing women. And then the guy's like trying to take it back and everything, and he can't. And it's so bad. It's just so intense. And then he just runs off, and that's the end of the scene, right? He's once again unscathed, no chip on his shoulder. I mean, no wound, nothing.
Yeah, there's a sadistic element to his character, and the irony or the weirdest part of it, right, is it doesn't feel like it's even rooted in any motivation like that you can, I guess, extract from it besides amusing himself, right? Like that level of like apathy. And it's weird to use cynicism in this context, but I saw a lot of people calling the film cynical and the characters cynical, and it's like implicitly cynical, right? It's just like it sees the world and other people's problems or just other people as fodder for humor. And when you brought up the taxi scene, in my head I was like, which one? Because there's actually two great taxi scenes. The other one where they're bugging the guy for not having a radio, and then they start rapping in the back
for so long. Like,
yeah.
You're not gonna get no tip. You're not gonna get no tip.
Right. And I've known types of, like, I've seen glimpses of these characters in real life, and I've spent a lot of my life as someone playing in bands. And for whatever reason, they remind me of a lot of people in the music scene, particularly. And I do think it's interesting that all of these actors are not only comedians, but a lot of them are also musicians. I know we're going to talk about Gregg Turkington more after, right? But Gregg Turkington, who has a role here, is also a musician. Tim Heidecker is a musician. He actually has a really good album that came out in 2020.
I like it.
Yeah, me too.
James Murphy, of course.
James Murphy, of course, too. And, you know, LCD Sound System is kind of the personification of New York hipsterism during that time period as well, right? So just having him there, not saying much of anything. I don't know if he has like more than 2 lines in the film, but kind of baffled, kind of less abrasive, but going along and hanging out with the boys makes so much sense. It's just, he's such a perfect peripheral character and such a brilliant casting to me. And he doesn't say a simple thing, right? And Shut Up and Play the Hits had just come out, which was a huge indie doc, right, about LCD Sound System coming back for these huge shows in New York City. So that's also working for this film. And so much of this movie, I think, comes out of, as you said, the Apatow world, right? That was huge from in the aughts, right? And
yeah,
for example, Knocked Up, I recently watched. And so much of that movie is Seth Rogen and Jonah Hill, and I don't know the name of the actor, but he plays the deadpan, emotionless, stoic guy on Silicon Valley.
Martin Starr,
thank you, right? Well, he's growing a beard. They have this ongoing joke with him, right? And they just keep making fun of his beard, right? You like, oh, you look like Martin Scorsese during his Coke years. You look like Cat Stevens. You look, right? Or just different pube jokes, all that type of stuff. And it's boys hanging out in a group looking for laughs. And I feel like this film is really showing the insidious side of that world. And we also see some of the more tender moments, either ironically or with sincerity, or not. Like, some you could tell that they're mocking intimacy and tenderness, right? Like early on, they have this scene where they're all kind of speaking in very feminine coded language, and it feels like they are trying to satirize kind of therapy speech. But then later, when Eric, sorry, I only know the actors' names in this film, right?
It doesn't,
which is
probably no difference.
They're unavoidably so.
Unavoidably so. But Eric Wareheim's showing him the pictures of his family, right? That is an interesting scene. That scene threw me for a loop. Actually, I'm curious of your opinions, because there is this feeling, right, of this, I mean, a personal nostalgia, right? He's showing his father, and then they're splicing with naked women, right? So there's that bizarre aspect of it.
Right. It was supposed to be the joke. It's just like, oh, yep, here's a penis.
Yeah.
But like so many other scenes, everyone is just sitting there not laughing at it, and he lets the long silence draw out and out and out, then to abruptly end the scene.
Right, like they're not even having fun with the joke, because they're at this level where like them laughing about it would be like embarrassing. Like they need to keep climbing the levels of irony, where it's just like, well, if we just laughed at it, like, oh, I see what the bit is, we would be a part of the audience. There's always this like one-up nature, and like, which, if I could like piggyback off with what you're saying about musicians, and I would say artists in general, or comedians, anyone who has this like precious idea of themselves, again, even rich people, like this idea of this like, well, like I'm even just thinking you're just a funny guy. Like I have this thing other people don't have, quote unquote, like, which is like something about you that makes you special, and that can get really corrupted very fast, I think. And I've seen it with people that they do start to believe that, again, like Joe Taxi Driver is just Joe Taxi Driver, quote unquote, and he doesn't have any thoughts or feelings or love like I do. I'm the main character here, all that kind of bullshit. And I do think, yeah, part of it is just random apathy and they're bored, but I think there is like an element of this. I don't know if it's hatred so much as just like, yeah, it's just like a feeling you can toy with people.
Well, yeah, and I do think that even though I can recognize in these people, um, the actual way that people use irony and jokes to distance themselves from things, I do still think these are pretty exaggerated characters. I mean, the main guy, Swanson, I just looked up, is his name. He is like a full out sociopath who just like wants to hurt people and fuck with them for no reason. And very
Mm-hmm.
often it's not
Yeah.
remotely. He's not concerned at all about being funny. And him being in this friend group where a lot of them, at least a couple of them, are like exactly like them. I don't know. They never really came across as actual real people to me, which I think is important to consider in this context because it is shot in this way that's trying to look very naturalistic. And even a lot of the people that they're fucking with are like very strangely silent and like denied their own personalities when it comes to actually reacting to these people. Especially, I mean, even in the very first scene where he is talking to this nurse for minutes and minutes on end, and the nurse is just completely with a dead face, not saying anything,
They
to
cut
a
back
point
like
where I
four
was
too
like,
many times where the nurse isn't allowed to say anything, that it does feel
yes.
like, yeah, it is like, or like
So
probably the nurse did improvise something and then there's like, we're not gonna leave that in or something. I don't know.
yeah, and the extent of that stuff made me think that there is an element of this movie that is more interested in being off-putting and trolling the viewer than necessarily being illuminating about these particular people that it's showing. And I know this is probably going to be a classic like Marc Seth split as far as my feelings about this movie, because
No, actually, this is where I kind of meet you a little bit. Is like
okay,
how like the mileage varies with some of the scenes and how some of them seem to work with the greater project and some of them don't, or like there's like an inconsistency of this, like, and I have the problem with entertainment too. There's like we're living in a cartoonish reality almost, and then another one where he's trying to communicate that this is a real person. Tim is like a real guy in a real situation, which
yeah, and he keeps
sometimes
interrupting
one or
those
the other
things.
works. Yeah,
He keeps
and
interrupting all those parts with these wandering atmospheric interludes where they're at the beach or they're riding bikes or playing softball or baseball or
mm-hmm.
whatever it was, with this moody ambient score, which seems to me like he's having a greater aspiration about saying something or making you feel something that I was never convinced was actually there. Um,
But I do like this
and
movie
That's
more than
crazy.
you, and I'm still not backing down about plotless.
okay, good. I was hoping that we would turn this into a fight.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But and it kind of made me think about, of all things, the zone of interest, just as far as my feelings about the film, that
Sure, honestly, yeah.
because it has like that film, this has a very clear like premise, you like conceit basically about how these people approach the world, and that this is not going to be funny even though they're making jokes all the time. And that was loud and clear like in the first scene for me, and it started to get very repetitive, and I'd never felt like the movie actually took that somewhere or went deeper with it by the end, as opposed to just repeating it over and over. And we get this last scene that I think people could argue is trying to show us some sort of glimmers, of perhaps him having a childlike innocence or or maybe he's, I don't know. It gives you so much to read into. I can't even totally say what. It's almost too open ended. But I need more support throughout, I guess, for that
Yeah.
to actually resonate for me. I felt a little bit at that point like it was the emperor's new clothes were suddenly being revealed, as there's not actually that much going on in this movie besides wanting to give me a very unpleasant time, which it did.
I like your critique there, and I do see that, right? Like his conceit is pretty transparent early on, and he kind of shows his hand early, and repeats it and repeats it and repeats it ad nauseum to the point in which you're kind of nauseous as a viewer by the
Right.
end of the film. And as much as that can be both grating and maybe not work as a project that's seeking entertainment or even intellectual stimulation,
Mhm.
you think maybe the antithesis of that is make a short film, right? Just condense it. But
Right.
I don't think
Crossed my
that
mind.
works. I personally don't think that works, because I think you have to have the drudgery of seeing it enough. It has to have, there's this like perfect space it has to be for it to truly be effective.
It would let you off the
Cringe art,
hook.
yeah, you can't just get the idea of cringe art without, or get the idea of anti-comedy or something that's trying to estrange and alienate you without feeling estranged and alienated and actually not liking it. So
Uh-huh.
that's the funny thing about these types of films, right? Is that that's a perfect critique of the film, and I totally am on board for that. But at the same time, the film at one needs to be this long, in my opinion, for it to even be effective at all. Otherwise, it loses its potency. Period. It's just an idea, and as much as I don't want to, I guess, divulge this, I feel like they are a little maybe less cartoonish personally than you might like. I get that you were leading on, and I don't know what that says about me as a person or my friend groups in life or whatever that is, but they
No.
did
Mm-hmm.
resonate with me. Like, these felt like real people, and they felt like a true enclave in the sense of like the Jackass guys, right? It was interesting to see, like, why do they all kind of have the same humor, right? Why are they all trying to do the same thing? And I think, Seth, you said one-upmanship earlier, right? Like, there's this idea where they're not laughing, and it's like, okay, they have to that's not a word. They have to like be more detached than everyone else. They have to be more ironic than everyone else. And I feel like there is a sort of competitive element going on here. There's one character, the guy who is kind of funny and then constantly pushes his punchline too far, and they're calling him out, right? And I think that's a very revealing
Oh,
moment.
I love that scene. Yeah, and
Great.
it
Yeah.
feels real. It feels like something that might have actually happened, because it feels like something that like these comedians would do. If four comedians are hanging out in reality, like, I'm sure it happens all the time. It's like you're throwing around the ball and you're throwing it wrong, you asshole. And it's just like, oh, I thought we were actually being friends there, but I guess we're not. Oh, okay, forgot. Sorry.
And the way they call him out, right? Like, oh, you were funny. You had your moment. It was funny, and then you had to add that nonsense at the end because you're pandering and you're not confident enough in your own humor. But what that tells me is that they're
Which is
all
not hanging out. Yeah,
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
not hanging out.
But it also tells me that they're always looking to make each other laugh, and there's a sort of rivalry going on, a friendly one, right? It's like there's this fraternal competitive instinct to get the most shits and giggles out of everyone. And my high school group was a lot like that, and they were always doing pranks. I'll even specify that my high school band, so the people I spent like day, night, and morning with, outside and inside of school. So, you know, all the antics in here, as pathological as they go and as extreme as they go, I've seen that almost take over a juvenile male group. We were much younger than these guys, but it's not out
Yeah.
of the realm of imagination that this kind of clique would emerge or become as abrasive as they do become. So yeah, I didn't have a problem with the credulity of this film. And a lot of the scenes, right? Like, they go to a church or a chapel, right? They take that long taxi drive. What's the point of going to this place besides just being sacrilegious and profane? Like, it's as if like this is a pastime. This is a recreational activity, right? Did anyone
Right.
else?
It would
Yeah,
be a meme of us, it's a
yeah.
meme of going somewhere. Yeah. It's like, it's a joke that we're going there. Yeah. Yeah. I totally see this. I don't know. I catch friends even now sometimes in my circle. Like, are you like disliking this person on any real grounds, or is it because they're not like they're not operating on these levels, and they're just being like, I don't know, fucking sincere about something? Like, sometimes that is like kind of gets pushed out of certain circles, and it's so bizarre if you actually like diagnose it. Like, that's actually what goes on a lot, I think. Is this like, no, you're supposed to like it through these weird lenses. You're not allowed to just like the thing.
Maybe if these were like younger, more impressionable people, they would make a little more sense to me, or it wouldn't play as outsized. as it is, because, you know, if you had a group of teenagers trying to impress each other and tormenting a guy in a taxi cab, or just going to a church to like sing and shuffle around in the pews and stuff, whereas these guys seemed like literally like a group of psychos as where they're monsters being created for this movie that are meant to be commenting on aspects of real behavior, without it necessarily playing like it in the moment.
Yeah, I like that. Their age, I guess, can create some cognitive dissonance. But then once again, it takes me back to the Apatow world preceding this, right? And the age of the man-child as the archetype that dominated cinema. So even on a cinematic landscape, right, this is an interesting, scathing rebuke of that, in the sense that like those showed those characters in a way that was demeaning, but actually less harsh than this film, where this film, they just reek of privilege and entitlement and just inhumanity, right? And in those films, they didn't. They had this, you know, Seth Rogen was never really the bad guy, right? He was always lovable. Or, you know, Zach Galifianakis was, you know, as asinine as Alan is in the Hangover movies, right? He's kind of cuddly and he has an endearing quality to him. And so I do find it bold, as like, especially now that era is very much ended. Like this feels like, just whether it was inadvertent or not, it kind of signaled the end of that. Like it's a very well positioned movie to me, just on the timeline of this thing. And also on another timeline, you brought up like, what are these weird interludes, right, where they're riding bikes, and it's a little more poetic, it's a little more dreamy.
It's very Sundance, honestly. Like there's
William
a lot
Basinski.
of Sundance indie character studies that are all, you know, very deadpan and melancholy. It feels very much like that, with, of course, the people in it being completely off-putting rather than cute.
I wonder, and this is simply an hypothesis because I don't know. I think that could be just a flaw, and he was actually falling victim to the zeitgeist there, right? Because that was very much part of the zeitgeist and trying to make a good film as a new filmmaker.
And I think entertainment pushes that even further, but we'll
absolutely agree.
I'm going to table that for now. Yeah.
But I wonder, at least I want to do this like sort of retroactive, not defense of it, but like a recontextualization of it. Is what if he's satirizing the Sundance film or that depiction of this type of hipster, and saying like, and putting that in, interpolating that in the film, and then punctuating it again and again with these scenes that completely contradict that.
Okay, so that came to my mind with this, and it's hard to know if he's actually doing that, but I do like that reading of it, and I think it is in the sequence that you're talking about, and in the opening sequences. These sequences that are so stylized, they kind of show the hand that, just the fact that this opens with a slow motion, like it does look like The Hangover. Ordinarily, AC/DC would be playing, but in this one, there is Baby by Donnie Joe Emerson, and it was like a hit, quote unquote, around 2012, as it being rediscovered, this 70s album being rediscovered in a way that hipsters loved, and Ariel Pink covered it and made it like pretty famous in this way. And they're doing, like, of course, like adds another like layer of irony. We're doing the Hangover thing, but with this like tastemaker, like secret 70s thing. Also, they're playing like baseball and being like idiots on their bikes to William Basinski's Disintegration Loops, which is also like around this time was like a chin stroking, like, I love it. I don't know. It's like calling people out that are on this inside that like this stuff. And I'm sure Rick Alverson is also like one of these guys in some way. But yeah. It's like totally there. I think it is. And even, yeah, like we were saying at the beginning, that it's like this trap by sort of mimicking mumblecore or indie movie staple, like film techniques and things like that. I like that reading of it.
Yeah, I do too. I like that you brought up that opening scene too, right? Because with Baby playing, right, with them dancing, they're actually one of the guys holding a vinyl record. They kind of go back to that scene in Midway Point. Maybe it's a similar party, right? But they have another slow motion dance sequence, which leads into the sort of crazy, very like revealing dialogue where Swanson is trying to normalize Hitler in various ways, right? Because he's just such a contrarian, and which is a very commonplace thing in certain circles, right? Like someone who just wants to be that contrarian that and push someone's buttons that like both pervasively and diffusively, right? That they're always finding that edge, right? As also a form of like flirtation and banter. And so I see that and I agree. And I think that actually does come off as Alverson trying to undermine those scenes. But at the same time, I do feel like at the end scene, he is slightly trying to redeem Swanson by having him play at the beach with the kid. I don't know if it's also a demeaning gesture of saying like he's this look at this kid. This man is just a 8-year-old boy. Like he has not matured intellectually or emotionally past this stage, or of saying like he may be awful, but he's just so naive and innocent because he's like the byproduct and folly of a coddle generation, like the trust fund generation. I don't know, like that's a tricky one. And I don't know if you're trying to let him off the hook. That was a lot of the discourse that was going on at the time that I kind of alluded to earlier. And I did appreciate the rare, I guess, emergence of Alverson as a director in the discourse. Like he was unafraid, and I know some people might have mixed opinions on this too, but he was unafraid to jump into it. Like he was with invective countermanding A.O. Scott's review. Like he has long diatribes on Twitter that you can find. Like IndieWire was posting full articles about it, like the feuds, where he was saying like the artist's job isn't to coddle viewers with a partial, like a partial viewpoint, right? Like my job is to present a world, present a character, and you need to do that work. And maybe he was misreading A.O. Scott's review a little uncharitably, right? Or maybe there was this kind of reactionary instinct of if you don't condemn these types of characters explicitly, you are not doing enough, right? And that is very often in the like discourse of very, very nuanced, smart people, right? Especially in the last, I'd say 15 to 20 years. It's this knee-jerk need to be spoon-fed morality, right? And so that part of the pushback to these definitely annoyed me. And it is kind of a boring, I guess, dialectic in some ways because it's so played out by now. But
yeah, that's
yeah.
That's
See,
a very. I agree. That's a very like uninteresting way to look at movies like this. And we've covered lots of films that I thought of while I was watching this that I liked a lot more, and I was trying to think of why, because there's films that we had a whole episode specifically just about like the worst main characters, like as far as being terrible people, like Naked.
Which this is totally like comparable. It is like a Naked movie kind of.
Sure. The tones are very different, but it is another like wandering film about an irredeemable static character who does not change at all by the end.
No.
Whereas though with Naked though, I never feel like that's never doing like a troll job. It's exhilarating. It creates this whole world with other interesting people in it, and it has this mesmerizing central performance in it. But again, it is still a very different kind of movie, the way that it approaches all that stuff. And in that same episode we did In the Company of Men, which is another like about sociopaths basically, that is more plot focused. But it's very incisive about the particular kind of pathology of these predators. And I guess my main thing with this movie is too often I was comparing it more of how it actually plays to a film like Kids, where we're seeing people just be vapid and awful for 90 minutes without necessarily revealing anything or putting them in a challenging situation. which to me too often plays like it's just being bleak and unpleasant, kind of for its own sake. And what stuff that you're saying, Paul, about the filmmakers making me think like he does want us to take this seriously in a way.
Yeah.
Like, does he in one side, like he wants it to be in our face and in a way to like make the viewer uncomfortable and maybe even bored or irritated, like on purpose, but at the same time he wants it to be the movie that we think it might be like parodying or commenting on. Like, does he want this to be like he's using the Sundance tropes in a knowing way? Is it to make it so we actually are giving the illusion that something more profound is going on than there is? Or is he smartly using it just to comment on Sundance movies? I feel like it never lands there, and it needs to land somewhere for it not to just be annoying.
That stuff is light. I mean, I see that stuff as being light subtext that is in there. I don't think it's like the mission of the movie to lampoon the Sundance like indie mumblecore movie necessarily. It is just an interesting
I agree.
like observation to kind of see, and it's unavoidable again because of where this guy probably comes from in his like aesthetics and everything. But like to go back to the ending and also like talk about Naked, like I would say that like I like the ending, but I also find it very frustrating in that I wish there was more of that throughout the movie, and it wouldn't have felt maybe as frustrating for me on that level, and definitely maybe a little less frustrating for you, Mark, if it wasn't so one note. And that like we do get like a glimmer of like, well, of course this guy isn't a fucking asshole, ironic, like playing on this level every single second of his life. And same with Naked, we do get some glimmer of like, oh, I like this guy. There are moments where this like guy is just kind of like he's not always on, he's not always there. I would say at I don't know, yeah, we don't need to get into Naked too hard there, but yeah, I would have liked a little bit more of that. I don't need this whole. I think it's kind of boring to go too far where you're like trying to humanize him, and I don't think that's what that would have done. I don't think that what that final scene does either. It doesn't humanize him just because like he wants, like anybody would, like have a good time with an 8-year-old playing on the beach, you know.
Yeah, he could just be fucking around as much as he is all the rest of the movie, you know.
I guess you could read it like in that sort of way at the end. You could read it anyway by the end, but it's just like if there was more of that throughout the film, I think we could have gotten a little bit more of a nuanced feeling of like who this character is. And I think it would have felt, that's the only reason it feels cartoonish to me. Not that he's not believable, but it is just like so one note in that way.
Yeah, we also might be falling for the trap, I think all three of us, in reading too much in the last scene, right? Just because it's the last scene doesn't mean it is like the thesis statement of the film.
And yeah, I doubt it was. I doubt it was like
it
shot
honestly wouldn't have
something.
Stood out to me at all.
Yeah,
if it hadn't been placed where it was.
Yeah, and you know, a film like this that does not want to show its thesis in capital letters, right? It wants to be morally ambiguous while still having a clear moral vision, right? Like morality is in every scene in this film, right? Because they're playing with emotions that trigger moral thoughts as a viewer, right? We're thinking entitled, we're thinking supercilious, we're thinking snide, we're thinking all these things that have an ethical framework as we're watching this film. And these aren't idiots making this film, right? So it would be disingenuous for the filmmaker to try to play this card of saying, I'm just like depicting reality in an amoral or just like outside of a moral framework altogether. They clearly are. And I think one of our critiques is that there's a little, maybe too much craftsmanship going on here in some ways, right? In the sense that it feels gimmicky or filled with conceits. But at the same time, another thing that I find very interesting that you were bringing up, particularly Seth, is that right as it goes on, right, it's just repeating itself, right? It's very redundant. And you brought up like this idea that there's a horror element, right? And I find the emotional climax of the film, the scene on the boat where
with the girlfriend,
the girlfriend,
or the date, basically.
The date, who's another great actor from this time period. I can't believe I'm blanking on her name, but she's such a a staple of all these films. And she works at the restaurant where he's dishwashing, ironically, right? And she has an epileptic seizure. And the glazed look and lack of responsiveness in a scene that actually has, Marc, I think you mentioned this, like they don't have a scene that confronts him enough or pushes at him enough. It might have been you, Seth, that said this. Like there was nothing testing this character. I think this scene at least has a level of exigency that the other scenes don't have, right? Where when you're just messing around with a taxi driver or you're at a church in New York City goofing off, right? There's no dramatic urgency. When there's someone having a seizure on your boat, there is a instinctive primal call to do something. And his lack of responsiveness there to me was absolutely terrifying. And
he gives a Michael Myers head tilt.
Right.
Yeah.
But was it unsurprising? Would you have expected anything else from him?
No, and I think that is an aspect of Alverson that he leans on too much. And so, yes, maybe that's a critique, that it's very predictable. It's also very weird that he has so many characters just do the non-responsive look when they are being prodded and provoked. And he does this in entertainment too, where we talked about the nurse, how he has these 4 or 5 cuts to the nurse, the male nurse, right? Because he's being emasculated for being a nurse. And he's trying to incite offensive repugnance out of this worker, right? Who's tending to his father, who's on his deathbed, basically, by talking about prolapsed anuses in detail. And we're just getting a completely blank stare, which is hostile, right? But he's saying nothing. And again, he falls on that trope. Like the taxi driver doesn't respond to him almost ever. Whenever they're
even to say no,
yeah,
he will just be silent.
And it's quite bizarre because people usually respond. I thought of Borat a lot too, and Bruno, which came out right before this, right? Another sort of trickster figure, another sort of Charlie Kaufman-esque persona who's using cringe and awkward situations to illuminate social norms and social biases and so forth. And people respond. And I know they're cherry picking what they show in that film and they want the responses. But I think it's a weird proclivity that he loves to do. And I wonder if it's him having a lot of fun, as you said, Marc, with giving the viewer an uneasy quiet to sit with. I think he gets off on forcing us to really just sit with the scene. And if someone's responding, then we're just lost in the drama of the tension between the two characters.
Then there's actual drama. Yeah, that's like something to hold on to.
And so I guess it might actually be quite effective because in all those scenes, because the nurse isn't responding, I'm just really thinking about, wow, why is he saying this shit to the nurse? Like he should be thankful and grateful that this guy is helping him with his father, right? And so then your thoughts are all just dissecting the sociopathic pathology of Swanson. And also, I guess my last comment on this would be that it's kind of funny that Alverson in some ways echoes this same need for, not for apathy, but I think all of the characters in his films, as characters, as human beings existing in the world, never want to be exposed as well. I think that's part of their apathy. I think that's part of their inscrutability. And that's part of the dynamic in this friend group, is that there's nothing worse than being both like outmanned comedically, and there's nothing worse than being transparent to your friends. One anecdote for that, or a cinematic anecdote from the film, right, is there's the only scene in which Swanson really looks like he's ruffled is when the waitress at the restaurant starts talking shit to him in a very crude way back, right? And that's when he cuts his hand seconds later. And he's not used to having his like sort of alpha jester figure, especially by like a female probably, and especially by like kind of a stranger with sexual tension being thrown back at him, right? With his buddies, you could see they have a pecking order, but they all kind of fit in their space. And so I thought that was fascinating. And I think that Alverson, I got kind of off on what I really wanted to say, but I think that he has a need to be camouflaged as an artist. Like he really tries to hide behind layers of irony himself and layers of detachment himself. And
He's like,
yeah.
That specific part, and I'll make this my final thoughts, and I'll say whether I didn't watch this or not, and then we'll let Seth and Paul have their say, so we can make sure we give entertainment its proper due. And I perked up when he runs into the lady who starts to match him, bad joke for bad joke, and I wanted so much more of that. That thread ends up really going nowhere outside of the seizure. Then he drops her off at home, so basically he just ends up back at square one. Him getting into him driving the cab around gets a little tense, and maybe is introducing an element of actual danger, or how far this guy might actually push things that again doesn't quite go there. So that was the main thing that I wanted to see this guy actually get challenged in some way, or do something more interesting with the character, and maybe keeping everything even in this outrageous but then alternately flat register would give me more to work with. So that's why by the end I didn't feel as provoked as I feel Alverson would have wanted me to be, or to get anything really more out of it besides just the most kind of superficial, like, yeah, this is kind of uncomfortable and a bummer. I just don't think that was the reaction that he would have wanted to get out of me for this. But again, that's just me. And on that level, I was, it's not like this was unbearable or anything, but I didn't get enough out of it for it to be not in Unwatch. So I'm gonna throw it in that category.
Ding
I
ding.
wanted to ask you, Marc, too,
sure.
a little further to elaborate, because I forgot to ask you when you brought up the comparison to Naked. And I listened to that episode, great episode on that in the company of men. And I think you were getting at something very raw and honest in that cross comparison. And I just wanted, I guess I was curious for you to push that a little deeper, because you were saying that Naked has this feeling that it's a genuine world with truly dynamic characters. Maybe I'm spoon feeding you what I think you're saying. Is your issue with this that it's just like a flat register? It's a one note movie, and Naked has more octaves, or?
That's definitely,
Okay.
I think, the big thing between them. But also, Naked actually is entertaining in its own dark, very bleak way. And it is interesting to spend time with that character. And the fundamental thing about this movie is it never got me interested in why I would be spending time with this guy. Like, I don't have to like a character out. I don't even have to relate to them. But there's something about, why is this worth building a movie around them? That I think all those other films pass with flying colors. That this one just failed to get me interested in why I should give a shit about this guy.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did
But
either
Seth,
of you
what
laugh?
is-
Yeah, sorry.
Oh,
I keep
no, go ahead.
interrupted. Did either of you laugh? This would have to be very open and honest, because we're not supposed to find this funny, right? But did any of these very repugnant and abrasive moments come off as funny? Because at times for me they did, and I don't know what that
Yeah.
says about me as a human. Like when they're rapping, I'm not going to give you a tip in the back of the seat. I'm trying, or I'm self-aware of how disgusting that behavior is, and yet I find it funny. And I don't know if I should dissect that more and do some soul searching, but I was just curious, did anyone else find any scenes in here funny?
Well, yeah, I definitely did, in a more, but it's like a different kind of laughter of just like exasperated, like, oh god, he's gonna push further. Oh, it's a different kind of laughter than like, oh, but there are certain moments, like the taxi scene is a good example of like it kind of goes through, and maybe this movie at its best is doing that. That it's like these cycles of like, it's funny, and then you're like, oh, they're still going, and it's like now it's like sinking in that this is like kind of mean spirited, and then it's funny again, and then it kind of loops or something. Yeah, that's how
It's
I
kind of
viewed
the
it.
Michael Scott thing on The Office, right? You have if you have very actual real life funny people being as purposefully not funny or obnoxious as possible, that's going to become its own kind of humor occasionally. And
Yeah.
especially with some of the stuff Eric Wareheim says and some of the bits that Greg Turkington gets, I think just pass as, actually kind of funny, which maybe you need that little taste of it to make it more bitter, as they just never shut the fuck up.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that reference to The Office. I think that's spot on, right?
But
I
so
knew it
Seth,
would have to
this
get brought up.
I
Yeah, I
assume
don't
it's not
know.
an unwatch for you, but do you have any
Well,
final thoughts?
yeah, I mean, if I could round out my criticism of the movie, it doubles as my sort of endorsement of the movie. Is that like, uh, I think my critiques of it are similar to Mark's. They come from like a more filmic, more like wanting a good story, wanting a fleshed out character kind of situation. And I think the mission that this guy's on is a little like sometimes he knows what his mission is, and then like the director, I mean, sometimes he's like following the path, and then sometimes he veers off on tangents, so it doesn't all fit together just right. Um, but I mean, I would say that he's more, and I've compared a lot of films that we've watched on here in this way to like noise, like purposefully off-putting like music, for instance, that is just like, or art that is supposed to be purposefully off-putting, and that's sort of the point. And like a lot of people would be like, well, why isn't there a hook in here or a melody or something? Um, yeah, I mean, it would be like, and I don't know, and it's a very fine tuning that separates the good ones from the bad ones when it comes to those things. Is like, why is this really dissonant piece of music like enjoyable, and this one just feels like actual disingenuous, like you're just trying to no fun. Like, I don't know, this one kind of falls in the middle for me, as far as like it does just sort of achieve its one noteness in the way that I don't know, it is very unique. It's a very unique experience to be weathered in that way, in that off-putting art can be. Uh, it just, at a certain point, there are just like, well, you succeeded in making me feel uncomfortable and bored and like kind of depressed, and that's not exactly a great feeling to have as a viewer. And but if you set out to give that, you gave it. Yeah, that's where I would fall. Yeah, it is kind of like a middling feeling with this one for me.
All right. Well, Paul, the defense's closing argument always goes last.
Yeah, I do find this film engrossing, and I was trying to think after I proposed the question of like, why did you guys think this was funny at all? If you found any moments funny, why I thought it was funny, and I think I definitely came down to some reasons. One, there's a spontaneous improvisational energy here, right? We talked
Mm-hmm.
early in this podcast about how it was semi improvised. And I think that comes out in almost every scene. There's an emergent quality in which you're seeing people have to invent the conflict, right? And I do like how unrefined they are. You could see in some of the moments, right? Like the scene we've talked about, maybe more than any other scene for whatever reason, where Swanson's in the back of the cabin, drunk and alone and bored. And then he starts a conversation with the taxi driver at first, right? I think he's asking where he's from or something like that. And you could see him in his mind just sort of simmering, right? And you could see like, how can I push this somewhere weird? How can I push this somewhere uh, confrontational, right? And just going further and further and further. And that could be said for almost every scene in the film, right? The scene where he's talking like a slave owner, right? He's just pushing it further and further and further. The other thing that's also unsettling, right, and disturbing is that he's always kind of implacable. He's hard to read. Like he's very emotionless in his face, right, in his countenance. So when you pair those two things together, I was always on edge watching this film, even a second time. And I found the scenes in an entertaining way uncomfortable, actually. And we'll get in. I'm very curious to compare it now with Entertainment, another film that I really liked my first time watching, and now I'm more ambivalent on. So I find this highly watchable, and my defense is the fact that it feels very alive. Like every scene does feel alive to me, besides the sort of Sundancey interludes, to be honest. Those are the scenes that kind of feel out of place. And that's why I had to give a, I think, somewhat disingenuous contextualization for them to try to like tie up my own cognitive dissonance as someone who likes the film. So yeah. So overall, though, I do like this, and I think it's got, the last thing I'll say is it's got a very interesting space in time now and in various genres. I think it's by accident or not, I feel like it's an interesting response to what came before and what will come after that makes it very intriguing to watch for people out there who haven't seen this.
It'll definitely be an oddity, I could imagine. And I mean, the last thing I would like to say, because I feel like we've gone a long way and almost like taking for granted one of the, and I went through my whole closing remarks without saying it. Like, I think the real thing that actually makes me give this a positive review is the performance by Tim Heidecker. I do think it's a great performance. I really like him as a, just like watching his mind work. I like how he takes these things. I think he can really improvise well. I think it's easy after seeing him so much as a fan to take it for granted in that way, that of course he can riff and riff and riff. But I don't know. I think he's really kind of on fire in some of these scenes. I don't know. Yeah, the movie doesn't always rise to it, but I think he can act. I don't know. I really enjoy him.
I absolutely agree. And not to knock the other people in this film, right? But he has a level of complexity. I mean, that's the wrong word to say, right? Because he's kind of a one note guy. But I'm going to go back to my word implacable, right? His ability to be elusive and yet be doing the same thing in scene after scene after scene, at least for me, what is fascinating. And he holds my attention. I'll just keep it subjective throughout. So, as a comedian who doesn't star in many feature films, I found him riveting. And I'm coming off doing a bunch of Adam Sandler sports movies, right? And I don't want to go too far behind, but Adam Sandler kind of leads into Apatow, which leads into this in my crazy weird, doesn't really work, but my timeline here, right? And as like a comedian becoming an actor, he's way better to me than Adam Sandler in all of his early films, right? Not bringing in Uncut Gems or whatever, but I feel like he has way more range and I guess dynamic versatility in this role, just personally. So yeah, I like that you brought that up. Thanks.
Well, that's actually a good segue into Entertainment, because I would argue that it lacks a similarly interesting central performance, which I think comes down to, I mean, the ways the movie is different and that it's supposed to be different, but it also, this isn't necessarily about a bad guy or even an unlikable guy. Not that he's very likable, but he's more of just a miserable guy.
Miserable, unknowable, just like the movie itself, kind of, yeah.
I think that you have to talk about, or it makes it a lot easier to talk about this film if you know who Neil Hamburger is, which is who I was familiar with, and he's like this stand-up persona that Gregg Turkington, who was in The Comedy, uses. It's a very alt comedy, like conception of this hacky, gross out, like aggressive stand-up comedian.
Yes.
And I guess the idea of Entertainment was, what if we followed him around between shows and he's actually just like a super depressed guy?
Yes. Strange.
Like schlub.
Living in a sort of, mysterious,
that's pretty much all you have
world.
to, I mean, that's the whole movie, right? It's like a little road trip going around, and he does the show. Everyone hates him. He's miserable. He meets some people along the way. And it has kind of a tone that very much seems like the guy who made The Comedy. But it's not quite as, it doesn't feel as much of like a troll job as you could accuse The Comedy of being. It seems more like a typical, here's the hangdog guy who daughter won't talk to him as he goes around. Like, this could have been Paul Giamatti maybe in a different universe.
See, this
Yeah.
feels more like an expansive, less narrow idea for Rick. I feel like it is not aiming to do one thing necessarily, even though there is like the central conceit. Like, once again, it's like in conversation with the comedy that it is like it's a sad comic, sad clown, going through the world and all that. But I would say it like kind of feels, and I don't know why I'm blanking, but there's plenty of movies like it. Like, I don't know, like David Lynch movies or something. It feels more like that. Like it's more about mood, and he's following from like one strange interaction to the next, and they like you're sort of just left with like a mysterious sort of off-putting feeling at the end, and you wonder if there's even like a mystical element happening with certain aspects of it that like I don't know, but he's maybe even not I don't know, like not like he's supernatural or something, but crosses more into the way of like he's some kind of cartoonish, this is a world that he's entering into of some kind, which is way different than the comedy in a way.
Yeah, it definitely pushes to a more enigmatic space by the end. And it, as you said, it gets very Lynchian. There is almost a direct homage to Lynch, in my opinion, in the sense of the main character entering this very strange kind of telenova sitcom that he's watching throughout in the very end, and then watching himself in the telenova. The whole filtered lights.
Eraserhead. That's like totally. You can see that here. Like even just him walking across the desert with these like weird cars that are broken and things like that. Definitely
Yeah.
it has that feeling, and the constant like swells of weird drones and things.
And at the same time, for me, in some ways, it feels more expansive because he is working with another comedian's uh, shtick, let's call it, Neil Hamburger. But the redundancy in this one, I think, wears at me personally more than the comedy, whereas the comedy feels like an assemblage of multiple situations that are very similar but different. This feels like he has 4 or 5 ideas that he is just patching together in sequential order. Like I watched this movie for a second time very much as like a writer or as a storyteller myself, like someone who's put together stories. And like he does this sort of like, there's like the stand-up bit, then there's like exploring some niche weird local thing like abandoned airplanes or mines or oil derricks. And then there's the hotel bit where he's leaving voicemails or he's in some environment that he doesn't want to be in, right? And he's glum and misanthropic and like desultory and just kind of sulking. And you could tell he's just waiting to the next gig. And I felt like it was just kind of churning through that. Like, and I don't know, it just, by the end of this one, I guess it gets more interesting as it goes because those external scenes, right, with the locals he's meeting or forced to sleep, not with like sexually, but like on their couch, and because he lacks the fiscal
Yeah, he's on
means
tour.
yeah, he's on tour, and he's definitely not a very lucrative comedian by any stretch of the imagination, right? Until it gets, I guess, a little very strange, right, where he's like somehow delivering a baby in a bathroom in one scene, and then has an encounter with Michael Cera in another, right?
People are gonna be like, "What is this?
What is this movie?" Yeah, and then like there's another scene where he's with a bunch of tweakers, and then they're doing some weird cultist thing.
Just light
there's a lot of
therapy.
movies like this.
Yes.
Bullet points. It feels like bullet points.
Yeah,
like they're kind of he's just kind of throwing in whatever weird idea that he has. And I think even a lot of filmmakers that I like sometimes, like there's certain times in like the second half of certain even like Coen Brothers movies that I really like, where it seemed like they kind of turn into just these episodic, bizarre encounters, and it kind of loses the thread of what was more focused before. And I mean, that's the Coen Brothers, which is, like these are master filmmakers. But there's I feel like every once in a while, P.T. Anderson kind of does that in some of his movies. And again, I'm naming filmmakers that I love right now. I'm trying to think of something that would maybe be a little less flattering to compare it to. But even David Lynch, like I love David Lynch, and the stuff I don't love by him is when he starts to make movies that feel like he's just overloading us on the weirdness or whatever came into his mind that day without it cohering into anything. And when someone like Rick Alverson does it, it really does start to just feel like an affectation to me than anything that he's biding time without really having a more arresting idea at the center of this. And you can see how the style in this changes. He's filming in scope now in this big widescreen frame. The cinematography is much more accomplished.
Pretty.
And it just makes it, but it just makes it look like a lot more, like 100 other quirky Sundance indie character study, ominous, ambiguous things, which is weird. It's like I didn't really like it in the end any more or less than the comedy, but for different reasons. And I mean, that's kind of where I ended up on this.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, this is a different beast altogether. While there is a lot of overlap, and you could tell it's the same budding auteur, right? He's still so early in his career, but he has a style and tone, right? I think this one falls more in like the world of Quentin Dupieux, right? Who makes all those existential kind of
Sure.
one joke movies that I tend to have a real fun time with, like Rubber and Deerskin and Reality. And it falls less in the sort of realm of docufiction that maybe someone like Robert Greene plays in. Robert Greene made Vicky plays, or what is it? Kate plays Christine. He made a film about Bisbee. Whereas he's kind of having this, once again, dialectic between the real and the fake, the fictional and the performative, like in the moment. And I guess in a weird way, entertainment leads into both, right? Because Neil Hamburger is a real life comic, and you get the idea that they are kind of using this film as an experiment of like, how do we push this comedic bit into something that is a full length feature. I mean, in that idea, it's kind of fascinating because you usually get this from a Saturday Night Live movie, right? Like you get A Night at the Roxbury, for example. You get these really garish, I say stupid in an impartial way, but like these, stupid caricatures that someone gets the idea that they're going to be able to stretch into a full length film, right? And usually
the movie is that character. It just all stems from that.
But it also isn't, because, and I had a really big problem with this, because there's something really does not make sense to me with how this movie was conceived, okay? Because this Neil Hamburger character is very clearly like an aggressively, deliberately alienating like caricature of a particular kind of comedian that's trying to be off-putting. That it's his whole thing, and it's clearly an act. It's clearly an anti-comedy like performer up there.
Yeah, because we see him after the fact. He's like a normal guy. He is a normal guy.
This isn't a movie of what if Neil Hamburger was a real guy. It's what if the guy who did Neil Hamburger somehow didn't realize that, like, why would you be touring this character around empty country bars with unsuspecting people? And then he reacts as if like, oh, they just don't like my jokes. And he has no idea that the whole thing is a provocation. And that just didn't make sense to me. It was like they went halfway to, oh, wait, no, we can't have him act like that in real life because then we can't make this be like a melancholy indie film. But also it makes no sense that this guy never acknowledges that this is what he's doing. It would be like if Andy Kaufman was going around dressed as Tony Clifton, like in little bars like this, and no one's laughing. And then afterwards he's just like, man, I don't understand why they good. Like, no one likes my act. I'm not going anywhere. Like,
oh, it's not even that.
That's like
the real problem, and I don't think it's even intentional. I don't know.
Right.
I'm being generous in a way, but like I think like what does communicate at a certain point is this sort of like self-important feeling from the central character who is on this tour. It's like the scenes are like it's all about like him feeling so depressed and so like alienated from the audience that like, oh, these masses, they're so brainless, they just couldn't ever follow like and like understand the heights that I reach with my weird ironic anti-comedy thing. I don't think they're trying to do that, but at certain points, the way the music, the way the vibe works, because most of the time it's just music and vibe, it kind of feels like that's like how I'm supposed to feel, like, or like this is actually like some actual story about a suffering artist, or like the way it is to be misunderstood about your art, even though you have like that beautiful thing inside you. I don't know. I'm a little puzzled by that.
Yeah, my first reading of this was so cursory and banal. It was like, this is a sort of tortured, misunderstood artist who is not, out for entrepreneurial gain, like his cousin, played by John C. Reilly, and he is just destined to a life of alienation, right? Because he seeks the cringe, right? Like he seeks this thing that like is not meant to satisfy the public, right? It is antisocial by nature. But you're bringing
It
up
feels
some
like he doesn't realize that though, right? Like he's not in on what the act is.
That is the most fascinating thing that you've brought up, and that's the thing that I think we need to interrogate in this conversation the most. It's like,
frankly, I'm just confused.
Yeah, what are they doing there, right? Why is he, first of all, on this tour, going to play dive bars and roadhouse kind of diners in Mojave Desert, which is right in my backyard. I grew up here. So it's another kind of easy thing for me to fall into. It's like, oh, I'm literally pointing at the screen knowing spots, like the car wash scene, like dumb scenes, or like different even shots of the desert I can recognize, for example. So it's familiar for me, and so that those environments are familiar, right? It isn't just like, oh, I know the spot, haha, but it's like, oh, I know that dynamic and ecosystem. And so I guess where I might be more charitable than almost any viewer is, as a band, we often played like veterans halls in the middle of like Ridgecrest, and it was just a bunch of bikers. And there's this space where you are an unsuccessful artist and you literally are just so desperate or so aimless that you just do anything. And I guess that's the best I can give this plot. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Why is he on this tour? Why is he playing these venues? Why is he playing these prison yards? What is he doing fundamentally here?
Yeah, the problem is it is just, again, one bullet point in this movie, that sort of meditation, and that's not concentrated on enough. It is only just there, like him despairing after a show and John C. Reilly. I mean, initially I do kind of love, and in a vacuum I kind of love their banter initially, because John C. Reilly is the quintessential, like, every artist who hasn't made like $1 million at their art, your dad is probably like John C. Reilly, right? He's like, it's good you're doing that. It's good you're getting yourself out there. That's like his mantra, and it keeps going and stuff. Like, and it's just like, it's weird. I don't know. Like, I could give you some pointers if you wanted to actually, like, I don't know, like, please people. Like, that's pretty good. But again, the movie is not trying to do that. It kind of leaves that in the like barest sense. I don't know, which is the problem with that. It's not finished.
This has its moments, man. John C. Reilly giving him backhanded compliments and then like not being able to restrain these like asides. Like, he's not even talking to anyone else. He's just like, it's weird though. Like, or he's just like insulting it, right? But then trying to be positive because he's a like genial guy. I found absolutely hilarious. Like,
I was very happy to have John C. Reilly around, just because he's really good at this kind of thing. And even though this specific character really could have been airdropped in like from any of his like 2000s improvised comedies, but it still was something for me to latch on to. Like, it really was like a nice breath of fresh air every time he was on screen. And sometimes I did laugh when he's singing "Away in a Manger," when they're sitting out in the desert. Like, he's in the
why not?
He's only in a couple scenes. Like, I wish he was in way more of this movie. He's just another person who kind of comes and goes. I mean, he gets more screen time than Michael Cera at least, but and I don't know what we're supposed to get out of Ty Sheridan's like clown character. It seemed like another person just hanging around that didn't add or detract like anything in particular for me.
Probably a friend of Gregg's that is incorporated in his world, so therefore throw him in there.
And the old like leaving messages for your daughter who never gets back to you thing is just a very easy signifier for sad sack guy.
Loneliness. It just reiterate. Yeah, a lot of the things feel like cheap ways of reiterating that the central theme is like isolation, loneliness, or something.
Yeah, there are weird comedians out there, like those type of buskers you find in big cities, right?
I kind of like the clown guy.
Yeah.
I thought he was kind of funny.
I thought he was hilarious. I thought Ty Sheridan was, and his acting in those scenes,
shitting in his hat. Yeah, no, he's good.
He slays those with the tennis ball, and then he jumps up and gets all the like inmates going. Really interesting performance to me, and a lot of actors couldn't do that. And if you watch The Mountain, right, he is the main actor in The Mountain.
Oh,
so
cool.
It feels like he's building off this too, because he's a mute in The Mountain. He doesn't talk. He just has his camera. I mean, he has a few lines, but he's basically a mute, which is very common for his films, right? And this, outside of his bit, right, Neil Hamburger, Gregg Turkington, I think they call him the comedian in the script. He's basically a mute, right? He almost never talks. You have to like really wrestle with him to get a word out. But I think he is excellent in his role. But you're like, well, how did they get in coupled together on this tour? You don't get any of the background, which I don't necessarily need to have, right? But it leaves you with this feeling like this world feels so improbable. And that is a hard thing to overcome as a viewer, because like, is it a statement about, artistic effort being made in a vacuum? Is it a statement about, like, I guess maybe a comedic figure that's masochistic, that's almost addicted to feeling terrible? Like, there's this idea that he is depressed and he's on this tour simply to humiliate himself. I don't know. It's a bizarre movie. He also gets so upset, right? That's part of his whole routine, is that if there's any disruption in the audience, right, he breaks the fourth wall and starts to just spit vitriol at real humans, right? And then he goes on these long rants after the show about the lack of security, right? And he has this very authoritarian, conservative, like, I'm so reaching here, but I hope my connection will work. It's sort of like, I need like a police state, or I need like this very systemic order to protect my sacred like property, right? Which is his show. And I was thinking about, because we watch these back to back, his very short cameo in The Comedy where he's having brunch with Swanson, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a bizarre scene where he's talking about being a landlord and renting it out, and he's talking about how like hobos would be the best people to live there.
Yeah.
But it's also filled with this class arrogance and this need for like totalitarian control over something that he owns, right? I don't know. It's a weird fascist energy that comes out of this character as well, which is very bizarre.
Well, you're touching on a scene that you were touching on in the conversation we had about The Comedy, which is sort of, you could compare the two. The Tim Heidecker's talking about the anus to the nurse, and the nurse never says anything. And then similarly at the bar, there's a sequence where Neil Hamburger just starts insulting this woman, and we just cut to her like 4 times, and she just has like this pained look on her face. And it doesn't feel real again. It feels surreal, or like we're supposed to buy that he's doing, like, he's really getting to her soul, because she looks very like actually hurt or offended by the words, even though he is just saying like edgelord stuff of like, look at this whore, this dirty whore, and then the music is really ominous and stuff. Like that's like a scene, and she just throws water in his face. But that's like an example of maybe at my least charitable, what I see is like maybe Rick's problem is like maybe Marc said or something, that he's not following through with these scenes, and that could become like somebody could challenge him, and there could be like an actual scene that is difficult to orchestrate, and that might just be out of his range, maybe, in that like a back and forth, like to make that work, because it seems like various of these like vignettes, they sort of start and end in a way that is like almost afraid of getting into something bigger or letting the scenes be something more. I'm not even asking for them to be less weird, just like I don't know, for there to be more there, like a conversation between the two of them.
And that reaction, I think, would make more sense if he was just a regular hacky comedian, or maybe a one that's pretentious and, you know, trying to make people think and nobody, but he's not funny enough for them, which I wouldn't necessarily like to actually, you know, watch and sit through anymore. But for him to have these rants about how people are, you know, interrupting his show when he's doing an act where clearly the whole point is to antagonize people. And it feels like it's part of the act when people react that way. So again, that just doesn't make sense to me. But then again, Neil Hamburger is a real like successful thing that he had going on. So there are alt clubs in New York where that would kill, and there actually is a market for that. That's just why that,
which was about to be a conceit for
dissonant
me while I was watching this, but I did notice there's certain times, it's just not emphasized, but there are certain times where like people are getting it, they're in on it, it seems, or there's like the kids that want to film, they want to film like a short with him. They're like clearly like Adult Swim fans or something. They're filming something and then he just walks off. But he has like fans. They at least acknowledge that there is like some sort of fan base or something. But yeah, I don't know. It's not. It doesn't fall into how he's received in reality.
There's an interesting examination here going on too of the type of artist that is purposely doing something dissonant, right? Or something that is anti their medium, right? And you could even liken it to punk rock, but punk rock has become its own subgenre that is conformist, right? Like if you're a punk band now, you are subscribing to a scene that has a level of expectations, right? But we've all seen, probably if we've been to enough shows, like a true punk artist. They could be doing anything musically, but someone who is there to rile up the crowd, to alienate the crowd, to create questions, right? What's interesting about these characters often, right, is they are dead serious about their work, right? Like this guy. And yet, in some situations, they also are seriously offended when people don't get it, quote unquote, even if crowds obviously wouldn't get it. So I'm wondering if they are in some ways being earnest here and trying to get at that dynamic or not. But I am curious because, you know, I've known sort of different guys who do like their interesting kind of avant-garde bands and go play shows, and they've been heckled and they take it dead seriously. Like they get pissed. I can think of an anecdote in a club in San Francisco where a guy tried to fight a heckler who's bugging him about his very just anti-entertainment style of music, right? So it
Right.
does,
What did you expect?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. What do you expect? But then at the same time, it rings a little true. But going back to, I think, what Marc said, how come, or it might have been you, Seth, how come no one has the scene in a movie where they question his art in a way that I don't want him to give him like a definition of himself, right? But that would lead to something interesting, right? If that woman he's heckling in the crowd that they, cut to 4 times starts to say like, what the hell are you doing up here? What is your point? Or like breaks the gimmick, right? Like cuts through the gag in real time. We have something there. And I feel like they're scared to go there. I get why, because then the bit is over in a way. Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah, I just kept feeling it was just giving me nothing this whole time. And I guess I don't want to start repeating myself, so I'll make this my kind of final thoughts too, and we'll kind of wrap up and compare this with the comedy then. Um, but this has some things going for it that the comedy doesn't, like John C. Riley, and I think it's overall less off-putting, both in good and bad ways. In that it was like every time that I thought, all right, this isn't being like, this doesn't seem like it's just trying to irritate me as much as the comedy is. But then again, without it lacking any kind of hook really to grab you, since they bungles the whole thing about trying to make Neil Hamburger into a real guy, which actually never happens. They just keeps him as being an act. That it ended up just kind of equaling out, I guess, for me in the end. And this does feel less distinctive though, where the at the very least the comedy is this kind of mission statement of the whole Rick Alverson thing, and this one is just too diffuse and gets lost in randomness and imitating other indie movies. That yeah, it's hard for me to really pick one over the other, but they do have different strengths and weaknesses, I guess. And John C. Riley is a big part of of tipping that balance. So I wish we had more of him. So yeah, I'll throw this in the unwatched pile too. But what about you, Seth?
Ooh, wow, 2 dings. I didn't expect 2 dings. That's harsh. All right.
And not really out of like aggressive, distaste or being offended or anything. It was just like kind of a waste of
Right.
time.
Which again, I do think I would say is my critique for Rick Alverson is still just that he's maybe just I don't know. I still oscillate though. I still oscillate with the whole like what I'm asking for is not what he's trying to do. But then in certain, I don't know. What I'm asking him to do is maybe be consistent with his like mission to be more of just like a drone fucking noise movie person or something that is like he's all about just giving you the feeling, punching you over the head with it, like making you feel like and making you stay with it, like you said, Paul, which is a real part of it. Like the length of the movie is like making you like really weather it and everything. But yeah, I still do think he's shown in doing that, like maybe accidentally, that he is like a very skilled filmmaker and I think can work with actors and does have a lot of ideas. I think could have real scenes like play out and maybe just a little bit more there that could get elevated to a level. But entertainment, actually, weirdly enough, I don't know when I'm ever going to watch the comedy again because it is just so off-putting. I do think it's like a better movie right now where I sit, but entertainment feels like, and I was so excited about it when it came out because it does still in my head when I describe it, it sounds like a movie I would really want. This sort of, I like movies like this that Neil Hamburger is almost like Alice in Wonderland in this movie, wandering through this like weird dream world through one surreal sort of interaction to the next. And I do like those things. I want this to be, I don't know. And I could see myself returning to it for that reason. I like still want it to be something that maybe I'm missing, but I don't know. It just kind of wind up like for the second time, and it was the same way the first time. Kind of boring by the end. It's a little dull, like, which is just kind of where it hangs, which is a little bit of a bummer. Like, I think this could have been a real opportunity for a strange, odd experience that it has like a more artistic value maybe for me.
Yeah, that's fair. So you ultimately, what are you? Are you unwatchable or watchable for this?
He likes to dodge the question.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I mean, I'm at like
I'm curious.
I don't know. I'm at like a 3-star.
Yeah.
Again, both
That's
of
fair.
these sort of like fall in this middle ground.
Yeah.
I like them. I want more or something. Yeah.
Yeah. You're non-binary on the critical.
Yes.
Conclusive.
I've been saying that for years.
It's complicated.
I dig it. It's complicated, right? it's in the gray territory. No, that's totally fair. I'm gonna go to bat for it. I guess I came out quite hard on it because we just got done talking about the comedy, and I segueing into this. The comedy held up more than this for me. So what was more interesting for me was my critiques, but I still do find this more exhilarating intellectually than maybe 90% of what I see. And I watched maybe too many crappy movies, but just this period of independent
I'll run with you
filmmaking.
there.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love what you said there. I that's where yeah, for sure.
I mean, I think he's doing interesting things here. I am interested in the film. There's too many times where I'm like, he's trying to do something Lynchian and it's coming off as too overt, or he's recycling the sequential storyboarding. Like I could like kind of visualize it and predict what's coming next, and that kind of takes away from the energy, the aliveness of the comedy. And this one also just doesn't have that. It's a character study, but unlike the comedy, the character here does feel more like denaturalized or fantastical, right? Because it is a character study of a caricature that's already a performer, and we don't get at the actual person behind the Neil Hamburger bit throughout the film in any meaningful way. He's laconic, he's diffusive, he is unresponsive. He has these really cloying, saccharine voicemails that he leaves to his daughter that really don't do anything for me at all. They don't round out his character. They're maybe my least favorite part of the whole film. But I mean, at the same time, like his bit is interesting fundamentally, right? And that doesn't hold up a film, right? But it's kind of like Gilbert Gottfried, but pushed into like the dive bar realm, right? We didn't even like go over that, but just his nasally voice, the way he leads every joke with why, the way he holds his 3 drinks, right, 2 in his arm, and he's kind of slurping one and fumbling the ice, right?
I love him, yeah.
I love him too. Like I could watch an hour and a half of Neil Hamburger, right? Legendary. Like he keeps saying it over and over. Legendary comedian, right?
He said so many times. Legendary.
Prop artist, legendary prop artist, Carrot Top. Like just like you.
Oh yeah, it's Carrot Top. Yeah, you have to like wait like a full minute to finally figure out. Oh, legendary artist Carrot Top. Okay.
Yeah, like it's hilarious. The bit works, and you know, like the putrid end game of some of these lines, right, are very funny. But I really wanted, as you guys did, them to. I didn't want them to give me some silver platter answer or this like Sundance depiction of
we're not John C. Reilly being like, you know, if you wanted to make people happy with your movie, you know, like I'm not doing that.
Yeah, I didn't want a success story. I didn't even want to like understand his psychic trauma or have something very crystalline about the role of the cringe artist in modern society. But I feel like there was something inherently disingenuous about how laconic and dismissive and elusive the character was. And it felt like the film didn't really want to go to spaces it could have gone and instead kind of played it flat. And like it ends at a party, for example, in LA where he comes out of a cake. That's at least his last gig. And I gave a lot of like, I guess, alibis for the film in which I could, in some alternative universe, kind of imagine him doing this sort of dive bar tour of the desert, right? Because where else is this kind of artist really going to go? I mean, besides like, you know, Echo Park, like the right dive bar there actually would work, right? Because they're going to get the ironic nature. But I could see it. I could see someone, you know, trying to push it into this new space or make money, or I don't want to overly go there. But I can't see him ever being hired by like a bourgeois family in LA. So like there's just so many moments in this film that just circumstantially are so implausible. And it's not even CinemaSins that I'm talking about here. I'm just talking about fundamentally like disingenuous constructions. And the artifice of that as a setup in something that does have a semblance of reality, to me, we use the word cartoonish a lot, right? But like it does feel like a story about a real comedian, right? They're showing the comedic persona and the real persona. We're not getting anything at the real persona, but we're being shown this duality. And so I need a plausible world, and I need a little more push and pull between those two characters, right? Those two sides of the character, for me to love this movie. But yeah, but still, I would, if this played in theaters today, I'd be thrilled. I'd be telling people to go see it. So
it sounds like that's not an unwatched then.
No, not an unwatched thing. So
right.
I'm definitely sticking on my watched. Yeah.
All right. Well, listeners, you have to decide for yourself on this one. So we've adequately prepared you. If you think you can handle it, go check them out. They're streaming on Canopy. And we'll see if he does something again. It's been like 6 years since his last movie, so
He should team up with
Who
William
knows?
Basinski and do the the disintegration comedy. I don't know what that would be, but I want it to happen. All 12 volumes.
I would love that. I will watch that for sure.
all right. Well, Paul, thank you so much for bringing these to our attention. Before we let you go, I do want to give you our quick little questionnaire here. Not to put you on the spot. I know it's especially answering what your favorite film is not always an easy one, but I'm going to have to insist that you commit to one for now and forever.
Okay. I'll commit to one. It came down to two, but I did pick one, and it's Sans Soleil, Chris Marker. It's not that novel. I know that there's a few people out there who love that, but such a transformative film for me. One that I can come back to once a year and find a million new things that I'm taking from that film. So, yeah, I love just the role of the rogue documentarian that's self-reflexive and just observant. I love travel writers too, so it brings like two interests of mine together. And yeah, I just can never get over that film. It just barely beat out Phantom India by Louis Malle, which is one of the most immersive, hypnotic, hallucinatory films you'll ever see. It's, I think, Louis Malle, one of the great new wave French directors. He has a divorce. He's going through a midlife crisis. He just goes to India for months with a camera. And a lot of it is just this brazenness of holding a space with a camera that I think some viewers might not get, but as someone who like to do a lot of travel photography too, I just am just mesmerized by like how he could just be in these environments and moments and just hold the gaze of the camera, the boldness of the vision and what that gives you is unreal. So those two, but it's Sans Soleil is my top one. Sorry.
Man, that's been
right.
so high on my watch list for so long. I still haven't seen that. I've always wanted to
watch
see
it.
that.
I haven't seen either of those, so this is I'm
Bunch
gonna
of
have
losers.
to move those up my enormously unmanageable watch list.
I love Leggett, so
Yeah. I love that too.
Were you able to think of a film where your opinion drastically changed, either from hate to love or love to hate?
That is my hardest one. I almost have to still put a pin in it. The one I want to say is slightly embarrassing, but I absolutely hated Interstellar the first time I watched it. Like, couldn't hate it anymore. The last time I really fell into the dark side, like all of the syrupy overreach of that film somehow worked for me. I was in the right mood, the right place. So just the transition into actually liking that movie was pretty profound. I guess Oppenheimer helped a bit, where I found Oppenheimer to be this like boomer pandering nostalgia flick that I absolutely adored too, but I adored it in this way that like it wasn't as high of a piece of art, I think, as some people might have like fell in love with it for. And yeah, so that would be it. Interstellar, I definitely came around and thoroughly enjoyed it for its emotional. I'm not going to call it complexity, but it's very maudlin film, and it is kind of doing what superhero movies do, which is creating like this very implausible sci-fi conceit to try to tug at the heartstrings, but it does it in a way that is so bombastic that is just like so unabashed that it hits, and it's always like, wow, I couldn't believe I actually enjoyed it. So that would be that one.
All right, that's a good answer, and one that I need to rewatch too. That I was very mid on initially, so I'm going to add that. Also,
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
one spot up the watch list. So, but what about a movie opinion you have that is deeply unpopular, that you're always getting shit for, that is unusual?
I'm a Sam Levinson fan, and I'll stick by Malcolm and Marie specifically. I think all the reasons people came after that film, the idea that he was being petty and attacking a real life critic, the idea that it was self-absorbed and narcissistic, those just made it more interesting for me. It's like, I don't get why Cassavetes or someone in like the 60s or 70s could do those types of things, right? And be revered for it. And someone is just completely dismissed for it. And I felt like that film was dismissed in ways that baffled me, and still baffle me to this day. I mean, I get it. It comes out of social media hysteria. It comes out of him as a shock artist. I mean, Assassination Nation is going for a lot of low-hanging fruit signifiers, easy stimulation. He's obviously trying to be a little hip. He obviously has fetishes about like adolescent culture and life, and specifically like druggy female characters. I also don't have a problem with that. He seems like most artists are preoccupied with weird stuff. Like he could have a fetish with this world. It's not like, I don't know. You could have a fetish with whatever if you do it in an interesting way. But that film had some stylistic elements. I'm talking about Assassination Nation still, that were interesting, but ultimately it was kind of surfacey. I thought Malcolm and Marie is a lot like a modern Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And it says a lot of really interesting things about an artist, whether you like him or not, who is almost more impactful in terms of the zeitgeist than anyone's. There's almost no bigger hit than Euphoria in modern entertainment. Like that show is very influential. HBO is very influential, and I think that you can see him as an understudy of a lot of better artists, and I think that's where a lot of people come off as dismissive of him. I think I'm seeing that with a lot of artists today who I actually will still like. You could say Damien Chazelle is in the same boat. People I think are way too hard on like a Chazelle because they're saying, well, PTA was better. PTA did Boogie Nights, and Babylon is ripping off Boogie Nights, so you're just a Zoomer wannabe. And I don't know. I think that's a good thing because these people are smart enough to take that criticism and then grow. But it becomes a little bit overkill when all these same voices are way more generous to other stuff that is really boring, that is really uninteresting. And so, yeah, I mean, if there's like an amateurish quality to a up and coming auteur, I think very forgiving towards that. And so, yeah, I'll go to bat for Sam Levinson. It's not a film, but like The Idol, I wrote extensively on. And it's because I got in online feuds with people who were just so unable to even watch an episode of that show on its terms, whether they hate it or not. They just weren't watching it on the show's terms. And then I got in a sort of, I don't want to call it a fight, but like a heated debate with my editor, I would say. And so I took it as a a challenge. And so I wrote more extensively than I wrote about anything about this show. And it was almost an experiment or an exercise in just getting into the details of what is to be extracted from this thing that everyone was saying was shit and garbage and nonsense and a waste of time and vapid and all of these things. And I was just, instead of being like, no, it's not, and then I'm just in the subjective war, I just went into the minutia of that. And so you could just like, if you're listening, it's on Film Obsessive or TV Obsessive. I'm sorry, TV Obsessive. It's sibling website, and I wrote about all of the idols. So yeah, Sam Levinson he's still got a ton of room that he needs to improve and grow and mature, but yeah, he's way more interesting than anyone gives him credit for, I think.
All right. Well, there's hardly a less popular person that you could have defended. So
Yeah.
that's a great answer.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. And then this is Unwatchables, of course. So what to you would be your most unwatchable film?
Honestly, my most hated film, my most uncomfortable sitting in a movie theater in the last 2 decades was Avatar, whatever the second one is named, the Shape of Water. Yeah.
Okay.
So I know I'm not going to win people because
Sure.
like I have a lot of friends who love this.
I couldn't get myself to go see it. Marc
I couldn't
did.
drag him there.
No.
I didn't love it either, but
Okay. I just
People say I'm the cartoony one. Nope.
it is just so intellectually uninteresting and insipid and visually monotonous to me. I don't care what technology he's using. I don't care if there's an actor who's playing a different age. It feels like a dull, drab theme park video I would see at Magic Mountain as a kid in the most like beautifully rendered way, right? Like, of course, he's pushing the technology and production in interesting spaces, but God, is it just bereft of anything but the most cliche narrative and emotional and philosophical thoughts. And its ecological like idealism is just dead on arrival. It to me is visually unappealing, and I just wanted to leave the whole 3.5 or whatever hours I was in that theater with a gnawing at the pit of my stomach, unlike anything else. I was just thinking about everything else I would rather watch than this film. And I think what really eats at me the most is I like James Cameron's work.
That's the same as me. Yeah,
Yes.
It's really frustrating that one of our, like, we have a great artist that is just,
He's gone.
I don't know,
like for
pooping
probably,
in a box.
Yeah.
Doesn't give a shit about us
You're not
anymore.
looking forward to 5 more of these till
No.
he dies?
Absolutely not.
No, it's a total loss. It's a total loss. Yeah.
It's a total loss. I just watched The Abyss when it came out one night in 4K or not 4K. That's what you watch at home, but like, preem, like
Right.
remastered. Amazing film. His textures when he gets to the blue collar heroes in these movies. I mean, True Lies is one of the greatest studio action comedies of all time, and has some of the most amazing set pieces with Arnold on the horse and the end with the helicopter. Titanic's a fantastic film compared to Avatar. It could have its flaws or whatever, but in comparison, it throws it out of the park. Of course, you can't underestimate the significance of the Terminator movies and everything he did up to a certain point. I'm all on board for. And to be honest, I love the one Avatar movie. If you could have done one, I don't know. I saw it in the right space and the right mindset. It was a little altered, and it was like at that moment, I'd never seen something like that before. And maybe there are people who experienced that with this one. I did not experience that. So it was just a visual confetti of new ways of showing, animation, kind of like this. I don't know enough about it, but that it bedazzled me. But these ones are not doing that for me. And
Literally unwatchable.
Yeah, literally for me. So yeah.
All right. And then, of course, the most important question of every questionnaire is Southland Tales, good or bad?
This one cracks me up because you guys just covered this one not too long ago. I almost want to know
That's why
the
it's
origin
on
of
there.
the origin of this question. And man, I'm gonna fall in the Seth camp here and be the most boring response ever. I fall right in the non-binary middleman, boring. Like I could leave it or
Wow.
watch it or take it.
Whoa.
Like I
See, that's a new response. That's a new
Okay,
That's
response.
a first.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like Donnie Darko a lot, so it was a bit of a letdown at first. I also like The Box. Right, that's the name of the other movie, The Box.
Yeah.
It's very philosophical. Shout out to there's an amazing episode on cows in the field with Matt Stroll. Please, if you haven't seen that film, watch it and then listen to that episode. It's just insane the philosophical spaces they'll go on that film that I would never have gone. But Southland Tales is way overhyped as this cult thing. And like it's also something that I didn't have that much issue with because all of the dumb moments, I'm a sucker for it. Like that's why I like Chazelle and stuff. Musical interludes that are absurd and over the top, like with Justin Timberlake, are okay with me. Like that's the problem. That's why I fall down the middle with that one. It's incoherent for me, and it's such a swing that I'll kind of get behind it. But I mean, I guess more of a litmus test, not to switch it. I mean, these days, I'm always asking people what they thought of Beau is Afraid, and that's the hardest one. But that's a whole nother conversation. So yeah, sorry for being boring there. I don't know where I stand on that one. Like, there's scenes I like, and so I don't find it absolutely unwatchable. But no, I don't love Southland Tales. I find it very incoherent and scattershot.
It's
I feel
not
like you're
boring.
Still
I'm
pleasing
telling
me
you.
a little bit
I'm
more
telling
with
you.
the answer than Seth, but
No,
we'll call it a draw.
Yeah, no, I'm a little sad. I'll get over it. No,
It's
I
all
mean,
good.
I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I just get excited about it as just a weird experience.
Giddy. Yeah. I mean, my good
idea
buddy.
is that after we ask, I don't know, 100, 200 people this question, Seth will just give in and stop liking it.
Why would you want that? Why would you want me to stop liking?
It would
something?
just be funny. It would be funny. That's all.
Oh,
It's one of those that's I think, going to have a rough stretch because, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like certain Michael Mann movies. That can't. What's the hacker one? I just talked Black Hat, right?
Black Hat.
There's just certain films that like get such a revival, and there's the authentic ones like Seth who really love it, and it just makes you buoyant and giddy. I have a friend Jed who loves Southland Tales, and there is no like denying that he absolutely loves it, and it's infectious, and so that's why I'm on board with it partially. Like it definitely like seeped into my own viewing, right? But yeah, it was a bit long and bloated for me, but personally. But then there's also like a lot of like herd revivalists, right? Or it just becomes too revived, right? The Renaissance can't be too long. Everything goes in that cycle.
Reclaimed. Everything's a secret. Yeah.
Well, there's a reclamation period where it's in vogue, and then it goes out of vogue again, and the true lovers stick behind it throughout, and it'll just ebb from then on. So, yeah, I think right now we're at a point where I think some people are over the reclamation of certain films, and that might be one of them.
Well, Seth, I hope you love it forever and ever. And
Me too.
Well, you're going back on your. Okay, fine. All right.
Yeah. Listen, it's up to you. I'm pro-choice, so whatever you want, is good.
That's beautiful.
But,
I'm
Paul,
pro
thank
movies.
you so much. This was a blast. Once again, it's always great to have you on. Is there anything with Cinematic Underdogs that you want to tease or put out there for the unwashed masses who are listening right now?
Oh, right now we're doing Adam Sandler versus Will Ferrell movies.
That's fun.
Back to the basics. They're fun. They're really bad. I could have chosen a lot of those for like where my opinion changed the most, right? It's changing from my rose-tinted childhood glasses to my more mature self. But yeah, so check those out. The conversation, goes interesting spaces no matter what. And Uncut Gems is coming next, so I know there's a lot of big fans of that film. I just saw it in IMAX. I'm excited to talk about that one. So look out for that in the upcoming weeks.
All right, cool. Check it out. And maybe in tribute to Rick Alverson, we can just end with a long, uncomfortable silence.
Legend. Sorry, I ruined it. I just wanted to yell.
Yeah. Why did Unwatchables end on uncomfortable? uncomfortable silence.
You know, ending on a bad joke is just as appropriate.
Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.